Welcome to season 2 of What Sales Can Learn From. In this season, we're taking a little bit of a different approach. And we're going to be talking with today's most successful sales leaders, not to find out what makes them so great, but where did they mess up that made them where they are today? What lessons have they learned from their mistakes? Because as Otto von Bismarck said, it is a fool who learns from his own mistakes. It's a wise man who learns from the mistakes of others. So subscribe to the channel, and if you've missed last season, check it out on the channel, What Sales Can Learn From Season 1. Here we go. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of What Sales Can Learn From. I am excited and thrilled to be joined by Jeanette Bronée, the rethinker, the well-being culture performance strategist, the global keynote speaker, two-time TEDx speaker, author and CEO of the founder of Path for Life, Inc. Like me, she's also a dog mom and a mountain girl in the Catskills. And what's your dog's name, Jeanette?
Maya.
And she has her own Instagram account. So Jeanette, you help people and companies bridge the wellness gap, prevent burnout, and rethink self-care and its impact on performance, which is what I'm really excited to talk about with you today in regards to sales performance, as well as engagement and relationships and culture by empowering, as I think everybody would agree, our most important resource is our humanity, which I think, say what you will about the pandemic, it I think has forced a lot of people to start rethinking or redirecting that way. So can we talk a little bit first about how you help people make this shift from what you call operating survival mode to this self-care mindset? Because I know a lot of people, and I am guilty of this myself, have thought self-care, frou-frou-y, wussy, not, you just got to hard, grind it out, push it out, work it out. So how do we start making that shift?
It's one of the million-dollar questions, essentially, because there's a multi-million-dollar self-care business out there. But it's, or not but, I should probably say and, it is somewhat the problem because it looks a lot like it is a treat. It's pampering ourselves. It's taking time away to go do something for us. And it kind of, that's great too. Listen, It's fantastic. But when I talk about self-care, I talk about the down and dirty, everyday self-care that we need so that we can be resilient, show up at our best, be what we need to be, not just at work, but also for others, both in our lives, but, for customers, for clients, things like that. Yeah. And I think what is important about it is the shift we're making, or maybe we can even say the differentiation that we're pointing out is between there's self-care is like, oh my God, I got to get away and recover from all this stress that I've had, which is a very sort of wonderful, nice, reactive, maybe even recover from burnout kind of way of looking at self-care. But the other way of looking at self-care is very proactive. And it's the support system that we bring into our every single day habits and perspective.
Yeah, it's kind of like you've burned out, so now you need a Band-Aid, and so you take off. Kind of like dieting, right? Like there's the fad diet, you need to lose 20 pounds before the big event's going to happen, versus something more proactive, something more like a lifestyle, it sounds like. And this is one thing I didn't know about you, is that you've spoken at the UN and delivered TED Talks and conferences and workshops around the world to really talk about how to facilitate this change in the relationships that we have really with ourselves, so that we can be busy but healthy at the same time. And a lot of people who are working from home, they're finding it hard to find this kind of a balance. So let's start there, actually. When we look at self-care, and I know for me this was the struggle, is how do I find the time? There's so many other things that I could be doing. How do you help people find that balance between being busy and healthy?
That's the other myth about self-care, right? Is that self-care takes time. Because again, it looks as if it's time away from something rather than something we do to support us in spending time better.
Interesting.
So, for example, have you ever felt like you couldn't focus and you felt like you just kept going over the same thing over and over again? You knew you had to finish it, so you keep pushing through, but you're actually hungry, but you really got to finish before you go and eat something. And then before you know it, another 2 hours pass by, and finally you give up. You go eat something and you come back and you're like, what was I doing? This is not
Why didn't
making
I
any
see that
sense.
right in front of me, kind of thing?
Yeah, this isn't making any sense. And then you sit down and then in half an hour, it's just done and much better. And
Yeah.
that's often what happens, right? Because we keep pushing through without the support of, for example, our blood sugar, our energy. We might not even drink water. And those are just basic things that shouldn't be taking time away. You
Yeah.
can argue that it seems as if they take time away because we have to stop and go eat.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that they give us time back. And that's where the importance is. The importance is that it's the focus on how we are working better and functioning better because we took care of ourselves. And that's where the proactive mindset comes in.
Yeah.
Right? That's where it comes in, that this is something that we do because we need to be fully engaged, pay full attention, have the energy and the mindset. So that's just the basic sort of physical energy.
Mm-hmm. I see this play out a lot in sales teams with sales development reps, SDRs, who are new in their career, sometimes just coming right out of college. There's a lot of pressure on them to succeed and perform. It's their first entry into the sales role. And what I see sometimes happen is that they will, grind it out, as they call it, where they'll just be on the phone, one right after the other, and they do these blitzes. And which is great because it gets the muscle memories working and things like that. But what sometimes happens is then it becomes how they do it all the time, and not realizing that it's like you're like a wheel spinning in the mud, and you just need to take that small break to reset your mind. And maybe you don't have to make twice as many calls if you're having better calls because you've taken that moment, that break. And then it plays out into the rest of their sales career, where you're not taking those small mental breaks to recalibrate and readjust and refocus. And all of that then goes into that conversation. So if there is a sales leader who's listening to this and they see this dynamic happening, where there's, what's the cost of burnout? What's the cost of this lack of productivity and efficiency? Because this really isn't a fluffy, intrinsic trickle down kind of an effect. This actually does affect bottom lines. How do they figure that into it?
Well, there's a lot of ways it affects the bottom line. The immediate productivity is really hard to measure, but I think if we look at it from even just the place of logic, like if we are not able to focus and solve a problem with an innovative mindset, because we're under survival mode, which means our cortisol is high, our adrenaline is running, and we're just like, okay, I just got to get to the finish. Just got to get to the finish. We might actually miss what the one question would have been, or the shift that was in the conversation that we didn't even hear. Mm-hmm. Because we're just focused on getting through, right? And one of the things that often happens when we're running on survival mode is that I call it power pausing. We don't take this power pause, this small pause, and just goes, okay, let me just take a breath and check in right now. And like, what would be the best way to solve this problem right now? Or the question could be, hey, what do I need right now so I can pay full attention? Or, if it is a sales call, for example, I bet you have seen it many times. You have the rep down, you know what to say, you're actually not listening. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to sell the person rather than having a conversation with the person.
Yeah.
And you might actually just have missed the clue. And the person says, you know what, thank you, not for me.
Right.
Because it wasn't a conversation, it was just a rant.
And this is the number one complaint that buyers have of sellers, is that they don't listen. Yeah. And it's interesting because you would think that this was something that we would do innately, but it actually does take an effort. And then the other thing that we look at when we're working with sales leaders, to your point, they miss the questions that they should be asking. They know what to do. Why can't they seem to do it in that particular moment? This is one of those big reasons why. And when we work with sales teams, we call it emotional involvement.
Exactly.
Not being able to be present in the moment because I've got to get to that finish line. I've got to get through this sales process. I've got to get to that decision maker, and not being able to be clued in what their tone of voice is like, the pauses, and letting them speak after. It's all floats right over their heads. And then when their managers are listening to their calls, they're like, why aren't you? And it's funny because this is the reason why.
Yeah.
And to get them to slow down actually helps them to speed up. And like, if we say that to sellers and they're like, what are you talking about? That makes no sense. But now it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about why so many of us don't do this. Why do we, what happens? Why do we choose to just keep barreling ahead instead of the self-care? Even though in our minds we know we should be doing this. If I'm more relaxed, if I'm more in tune with what's going on, then I'm going to be better. We know this intuitively, but we still rush right through it all. Why?
Part of it is that we're a very result-driven culture, which means we miss that it's the process that gets to the result.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the people that are part of the process, not the product that becomes the result.
Yep.
And so if we can look at it a little bit and sit back, and I wanted to comment on two things to the previous question. One is there's another hidden cost of burnout, a hidden cost of not practicing self-care, and that's burnout.
Yeah.
And that has been a silent crisis for a very, very long time. It's costing billions of dollars, mental health crises that are happening across not only the globe, but in our society, especially with a pandemic like COVID that's hanging over us. Mm-hmm. We're finally having those conversations. That cost is a whole different, more of a immediate, we can feel it kind of cost. But that has been a hidden crisis for a long time, partly because we haven't implemented self-care in our daily work lives.
Yeah.
And the part about not listening before, there was one time I'm not very good on coffee. I talk too much and I don't listen because it spikes my cortisol and my adrenaline's running and I feel great. I feel optimal. I'm like, yes, I can do this, right? Like on top of the world. Except my client one time said to me, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now. You're talking at me. You're talking over my head. You're not listening to me. I don't want to have this conversation. Mm. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. What's going on? And she goes, well, that's how I feel. And I recognized and I said to her, oh, wait a minute. I had coffee today, half an hour before we have this meeting.
And now it's kicking in.
Now it's kicking in. I am so sorry.
Yeah.
And so what's happening here is that I'm fixing, like I was maybe tired. So I'm fixing tired, but it's costing me the relationship that I could have had with my client.
Right.
Instead of having known that if I don't get my sleep, I will be a little tired, but I would probably pay more attention. But instead I'm trying to fix tired by drinking coffee or eating sugar, whatever happens when people do that. We fix how we don't want to feel instead of supporting how we want to feel. Like we want to feel more energy, more focus, paying attention, being able to listen. So if we can shift the mindset that says, wait a minute, how do I want to feel instead of fixing how I don't want to feel? It's a slight balance here, but I think it's the same that happens in a sales call when we're trying to like say, well, I need you to buy my product. Instead of asking, well, what do you need so that you can buy my product?
Right. That's why we talk about it not being about you, not about your product, but what about them? What do they need? How do they see the solution? Why is it important for them to fix? What happens to them if they don't fix it? Notice how none of those have anything to do with you. So is that really the first step for us, for leaders, to be able to encourage this kind of thing in our workplaces, is to stop not so much focusing on what we don't want, but what do we want? And what leads to what we do want? Is that the
Yes.
first? What else do we need to do?
Yes, it's part of the first. But the first part is to understand that we think of self-care as something we do when we have time.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of thinking of self-care as how we spend time better, how we engage better with other people, and how we perform better at work.
Mm-hmm.
So self-care, instead of being sort of like this little thing that's hanging out on the side that we maybe get to when the day is over and our to-do list is done,
Mm-hmm.
instead self-care becomes what creates this whole view. Self-care is the foundation for how we engage better with other people, do our work, and so on and so forth, right? So we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs as climbing the ladder, right? And we kind of think that we can get to self-realization without the core foundational thing. So we kind of like, well, I'm just going to climb up. That's a very ego perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We need an eco perspective, which means if self-care is the foundation for how we interact, contribute, and work, then we have impact in the world.
Did you hear about Facebook's announcement that Mark Zuckerberg is giving all of his employees a week of Thanksgiving off because they have worked so hard in unprecedented times?
Right.
What's your thoughts on that? Because as you described that, that was the first thing that came to mind for me is if we're going to, that it seems kind of like, okay, you're burned out now, so go ahead and take a trip away for a week versus having that ecosystem that's built into the daily culture where, you know, and I don't know how exactly it would play out, but instead of having everybody take a week off, give them Fridays off. Give them a half a day off once a week completely for self-care, or not allowed to answer email from this time to this time. What are some of the other examples that you've seen leaders do to help create that ecosystem?
Right. I think we get, I agree with you that having these like scattered time off is essential, because time off is when we recover and restore. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important that we don't just think of self-care as time off. Mm-hmm. I think it's important that we think of it as what we do throughout the day. A lunch break.
Simple, right?
Simple. But like, for example, when way back in the 80s, when I was working with a spree, it was mandatory to stop for lunch. And it wasn't because they wanted to be like, oh, we want to make sure that you're being fed. Mm-hmm. It was because it supported a team-oriented culture, because we would sit down and not only get a moment for ourselves to just recover from whatever energy we had burned already and refueling ourselves with food and water, but we also had that moment of interaction and conversation, so that it created a culture of belonging and teamwork. Mm-hmm. And I have never seen anybody or any teams work as hard as we did at Esprit, but also supported each other as much as we absolutely could. I've never seen it in anywhere else happening to that extent. And Google also just said that all their benefit programs about, you know, lunch and healthy food and stuff like that, it wasn't just about food and healthy options as a benefit. It was to create a place where people could sit down and talk to each other. So yeah. I think the importance here is that we understand that a sense of belonging and feeling that we matter, that is a crucial point in not burning out. That is our emotional health. So when we're under anxiety and pressure and constantly focus on result, we forget the process. And the process is about the emotional health that happens between physical health. Okay, I need my meals, I need my sleep, I need my water. Then we have emotional health and emotional needs, which means interaction. Mm-hmm. Being able to have a conversation with people that is not focused on a particular outcome. What is the one thing that people miss the most during a pandemic? Unscheduled conversations. Right? Times where you can just like, hey, meet somebody, the water cooler talk, all of those things that we don't have because it's not a scheduled call.
Yeah.
It's not based on, oh, I got to reach something.
Yeah.
And that takes that edge of where we're just humans.
And if you think about the focusing on the process, doing the work, if you're in sales right now, you know more than probably anyone else that the one thing you cannot control right now is the outcome, the result. Mm-hmm. Because there's too much uncertainty. There's politically, anything else wise that people are, when they feel uncertainty, they are less likely to buy. And so as a seller, you know, burning out, how do you get through the slumps? How do you get through those things? It really is about focusing on the process. And I want to just close this out too with some tips, some things for those who are out there. Maybe their company is not enlightened to the point where they're creating this ecosystem and culture to make it easier to shift this mindset towards self-care, because this is really how we become our best selves and productive. I know from my own personal experience that the last year I've lost 76 pounds. And a lot of it has been doing some of the things that you and I have talked about in the past, of that more of that self-awareness, creating that routine, like starting my day off with yoga, just even if it's only for 15 minutes. But then also realizing if I want to get up in time to do that, I have to stop watching TV at a certain time or I'm not going to fall asleep. And if I don't sleep as well, like it's a domino effect.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you also recommend for others who are trying to implement this in their lives? They're fighting against that, giving themselves permission to do so, but not even just permission of, I'm going to be better for others if I do this. What are some simple things they can do?
Yeah. And I think you're pointing to a very important piece, and that is to shift the mindset. So it's not about having permission to take care of ourselves because it's selfish. Mm-hmm. Again, turning that Maslow hierarchy upside down, because actually you could argue it's selfish not to take care of ourselves because there's a lot of meanness going on because of it, right?
Right. Like for me, it wasn't I have to do yoga every morning. It was I get to do yoga every morning. I get to do these things that before seemed like I had to make myself do because I should. It was just a simple thought like that. What are some other things?
Yeah, like, so the thought is, well, I'm actually more productive every day if I do yoga in the morning. Yeah. If I move my body, because we are one being, right? We're physical, emotional, and mental. And for all of it to work, we need the physical, emotional, and mental to function together. So we need micro pauses. I call it power pausing. That small moment where we're just like, hey, let me stop right now and just be, what do I need right now so that I can? It could be that it's a 5-minute walk. It could be that it's a conversation with someone. It could be that it's a meal. It could be that it's a power nap. Actually, it's shown that having a power nap is more effective than having coffee if you're tired. And instead of jolting, instead of jolting your energy, it gives you renewed energy, right? Mm-hmm. And so all of these small things is part of what we have responsibility for. It's our responsibility to say, listen, I got to pause for a moment and just see, what do I need so that I can? It could be that we need to get something off our table before we can be fully paying attention. There's all these small things that we just push aside every single day, and it's gnawing at us in the background, right? Mm-hmm. It is that walk. It is putting that system in place that says, this is how I sustain my energy all day long so that I can pay attention, so that I can be at my best. And it's physical, emotional, and mental energy, all of it, not just one of them, mm-hmm. all of it. Right. And so that's a really, really important part, that it's not actually the responsibility of a company necessarily. It's our responsibility too. Granted, a company might need to say, okay, listen, all our meetings are 45 minutes instead of an hour, because that way there's 15 minutes to go do something that you need to do, like mm-hmm. answer an email, go take a glass of water, stretch, whatever that is. You get just as much done in 45 minutes as you do in an hour, as long as you know that that's the time you have and you start practicing getting focused and organized.
Absolutely. And you know, I've also even heard of some companies, like we mentioned, you know, you're not allowed to, no more email after a certain time of day, so that people aren't checking their email at all hours of the night, you know, keeping their meetings short. There are some things that you can do. And I find in working with companies that if the CEO has a mindset of self-care, that it filters down through the policies and the structures of the company and generally speaking. So I'm so glad. Your book also, I want to make sure everybody is aware of it, Eat to Feel Full. Tell me a little bit about this though, because how do you harness your hunger for well-being? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I am also a nutritionist, right? And so a lot of what I came to realize was that what stands between us and eating right is all the other things of self-care. It's our relationship with ourselves that gets in the way. If we don't think we matter at work, we're not going to go home and eat healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we don't feel we belong at work, we're not going to go home and take good care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. Like the opposite. Mm-hmm. So when I was writing the book, I wanted to make it so that people understood that this whole dieting mentality is all about not being good enough. Yeah. It's all about saying, well, I need to starve myself. I need to do all these things. And instead understanding that what we crave the most is to feel good. And that means we need to learn how to support ourselves with the food that helps us feel actually satiated and fulfilled, but also give us the energy physically, emotionally, and mentally. Because our hormones are interconnected with what we eat and what we do, how we think and how we engage. We're all one system here. And for too long, we have thought of our human system as being separate from how we perform at our best at work. And it's not.
Yeah. This rings so true for me because, like I mentioned, I've shared with you too, that I've been on this journey myself. I've lost 76 pounds. Literally, it has saved my life, this idea of being more present in the moment. And I was thinking about this, and people have asked me, how did you do it? What did you do differently? And I said, you know what? The only thing that I really did differently was before, whenever I tried to get healthy or lose the weight, it was because I wanted to look a certain way. To your point, the result. I wanted to look a certain way. But for this time, it was, yes, of course, I wanted to look better, but it was more about I wanted to feel a certain way. I wanted to feel strong. I wanted to feel balanced. I wanted to feel full of energy. I wanted to feel peaceful. Those were the things that I wanted to feel. And then that what I ate and how I exercised and what I did just became a almost unconscious choice because I knew how it would make me feel. Yeah. Like, I don't want the things like the cheesy pepperoni pizza anymore because I know how it's going to make me feel. Not that immediate, how is it going to make me feel in that exact moment? And then I'm going to feel bad about it and regret it. And then I might as well just eat the hot fudge sundae kind of thing, which is what happens. So I can absolutely attest there are things that we can do as individuals just to even just changing that thought process can have such a huge impact. Jeanette, thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to include the links for everyone so that you can go and check her out. And I highly, highly recommend her as a keynote speaker for any of your sales kickoffs that are coming up. Virtual, magnificent. Thank you so much, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for our next episode by subscribing to the Sales Experts channel or the Unbound Growth blog and YouTube channel. Let's continue the conversation there or on the Sales Experts LinkedIn group. Check the attachments for links to both and to follow our guests on social media and their websites. Until next time.